Picture this. You're on the most romantic island in the world, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Holding the woman you've loved for 5 years. You've just said your vows 3 days ago, promising to love each other forever. The champagne bubbles are still dancing on your tongue, and everything feels perfect. Then in the most intimate moment imaginable, she whispers another man's name. Not yours. His. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That's exactly what happened to me in Santorini, and what followed was a journey I never saw coming. A journey that would strip away everything I thought I knew about love, about myself, and about the woman I just married. My name is Jake Martinez, and until 3 months ago, I believed I was living the perfect love story. Emma Thompson had been my world since we met in college. She was the kind of woman who could light up any room she walked into with her infectious laugh and those bright green eyes that seemed to see right through me. I was a quiet graphic design major, spending most of my time buried in Photoshop tutorials and coffee shops, while she was the social butterfly everyone gravitated toward. When she chose me, I felt like I'd won the lottery. We dated through college, moved in together after graduation, and built what I thought was an unshakable foundation. Emma worked at a marketing firm in downtown Portland, climbing the corporate ladder with the same determination she brought to everything else. I freelanced as a graphic designer, working from our cozy apartment in the Pearl District, taking on projects that barely paid the bills but fulfilled my creative soul. Emma never complained about my modest income. She'd always say she loved my artistic spirit, that money wasn't everything, that we were building something real together. Proposal happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in November. Nothing fancy or elaborate, just the two of us in our living room. Surrounded by takeout containers and the soft glow of string lights, Emma had insisted on hanging everywhere. I'd been carrying the ring for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. That never seemed to come. Finally, I realized the perfect moment was just being with her, in our space, completely ourselves. When I got down on one knee between our coffee table and the couch where we'd spent countless movie nights, she started crying before I even finished asking the question. The wedding planning consumed the next 8 months of our lives. Threw herself into every detail with an intensity that both impressed and occasionally worried me. She had spreadsheets for everything: vendors, guest lists, timelines, budgets broken down to the penny. I contributed where I could, designing our invitations and wedding website. But mostly I watched in amazement as she orchestrated what would become the most beautiful day of our lives. Lake Oswego Country Club provided the perfect backdrop for our summer wedding. 200 guests watched as Emma walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car, her father beaming with pride beside her. My own parents had flown in from Phoenix, and my sister Sophia had taken time off from her nursing job to be there. Everything was exactly as Emma had planned. The flowers, the music, the photographer capturing every moment. The reception that lasted until midnight with dancing and speeches that made everyone cry. Our honeymoon in Santorini was supposed to be the perfect ending to our perfect beginning. Emma had found this incredible resort perched on the cliffs of Oya, with a private infinity pool that seemed to melt into the Aegean Sea. The suite cost more than I made in 2 months, but Emma's parents had insisted on paying for it as their wedding gift to us. I felt guilty accepting such an expensive present, but Emma convinced me we deserved it after all the stress of wedding planning. The first 2 days were everything you'd imagine a Greek island honeymoon to be. We slept late, had breakfast on our private terrace overlooking the caldera, spent afternoons exploring the narrow streets of Oja with its blue-domed churches and whitewashed buildings. Emma seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in months, finally able to let go of all the wedding planning stress. We took hundreds of photos, laughed at my attempts to speak Greek with the local shopkeepers, and fell asleep each night to the sound of waves crashing against the rocks below. But even in paradise, I started noticing small things that made me uneasy. Ma checked her phone constantly, even during romantic dinners overlooking the sunset. When I asked about it, she'd say it was work emails that couldn't wait, or messages from friends back home wanting to hear about the honeymoon. She'd quickly put the phone away and flash me that brilliant smile, but I caught glimpses of her screen enough times to see she was texting someone frequently. The messages seemed more personal than work emails, filled with emoji and the kind of casual conversation you'd have with a close friend. There was also the way she sometimes seemed distant during our most intimate moments. I'd attributed it to exhaustion from the wedding and all the travel. But looking back now, I can see the signs were there from the beginning. The way she'd zone out when I was talking about my photography hobby, or how she'd change the subject whenever I brought up our future plans together. I thought she was just overwhelmed by how much our lives had changed in such a short time. The third night was when everything fell apart. We'd spent the day on a boat tour around the island, visiting the hot springs and watching dolphins play. In the crystal clear water, Emma had been more present than usual, laughing at my seasickness and taking selfies of us with the dramatic coastline in the background. For a few hours, it felt like we were truly connecting the way we used to in college. We came back to our suite sunburned and exhausted, opened a bottle of wine we'd bought from a local vineyard, and watched the famous Santorini sunset from our terrace. As the sky turned from gold to deep purple, Emma suggested we take a shower together before dinner. It felt spontaneous and romantic, exactly the kind of moment I'd imagined when we'd planned this trip. The bathroom in our suite was incredible, a marble paradise, with a rainfall shower that could easily fit for people. We laughed as we tried to wash the salt water and sunscreen from each other's skin. And for the first time since we'd arrived, Emma seemed completely present with me. What happened next will be burned into my memory forever. We moved from the shower to our king-sized bed, still damp and glowing from the warm water. The sliding doors to our terrace were open, letting in the cool evening breeze and the distant sound of music from the town below. Everything felt perfect, the setting, the moment, the way Emma was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen in months. We made love with a passion and tenderness that reminded me why I'd fallen for her in the first place. And then, in the most intimate moment, as we moved together with the rhythm of waves outside our window, Emma whispered a name that stopped my heart. Ryan. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close to my name. Ryan was her ex-boyfriend from college, the finance major she'd dated for 2 years before we got together. The same Ryan who'd tried to win her back during our senior year, sending flowers to her dorm room and showing up at parties where he knew she'd be. The same Ryan she'd promised me was completely in her past, someone who meant nothing to her anymore. I froze. My entire body went rigid as the word echoed in the marble bathroom and out onto our romantic terrace. Emma realized what she'd said almost immediately. Her eyes went wide with horror, and she tried to cover it up by saying my name quickly. After, as if she could somehow take back what had already been spoken. But it was too late. The damage was done. Jake, I'm so sorry, she stammered, her face flushing red. I don't know where that came from. I don't know, it didn't mean anything. I pulled away from her, grabbing a towel and wrapping it around my waist. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I might be sick. How do you accidentally say someone else's name during? I couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt too heavy, too devastating to speak out loud. Emma sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, tears starting to form in her eyes. Jake, please don't make this into something it's not. Make mistakes. It was just a slip of the tongue. You know I love you. We just got married 3 days ago. But I knew it wasn't just a slip of the tongue. You don't accidentally say someone's name in that moment, unless they're occupying significant space in your mind. Unless you've been thinking about them, maybe even fantasizing about them. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down on the edge of the bed to steady myself. Are you in contact with him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma's hesitation was all the answer I needed. That pause, maybe only 2 seconds long, told me everything. She was trying to decide whether to lie to me or tell the truth, weighing her options in real time. We've exchanged a few messages. She finally admitted, nothing serious, just catching up as friends. Friends. The word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I thought about all the times I'd caught her, Texting during our honeymoon, how quickly she'd put her phone away when I approached. The distant look in her eyes during our intimate moments suddenly made perfect sense. "Show me," I said. "Show me the messages. If it's just friendly catching up, you won't mind showing me." Emma's face went pale. "Jake, that's not fair. You can't demand to read my private conversations just because I made a mistake." The fact that she called them private conversations rather than innocent messages told me everything I needed to know. I stood up, my legs feeling unsteady, and walked to the terrace. The view that had seemed magical just an hour before now felt like a mockery. The romantic sunset, the luxury suite, the sound of other couples laughing on nearby terraces, it all felt like a cruel joke. Emma followed me outside, still wrapped in the bedsheet. "Jake, please. Don't let this ruin our honeymoon. Don't let this ruin us." I turned to look at her, this woman I'd thought I knew completely. The woman I'd promised to love and cherish just 3 days ago. In the fading light of the Santorini evening, she looked like a stranger. "When did it start?" I asked. "When did what start?" "The messages with Ryan. When did you start talking to him again?" Emma's silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear her over the sound of the wind. A few months ago. Yeah. That would have been right around the time we sent out our wedding invitations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Right around the time she started seeming more distant, more distracted. Right around the time I'd started feeling like something was off between us, but couldn't put my finger on what it was. "Emma," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from someone else. "Are you in love with him?" The question hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I watched her face carefully, looking for any sign that would give me hope, any indication that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding that we could work through together. Instead, I saw guilt. I saw confusion. I saw a woman who was realizing she might have married the wrong person. "I don't know," she whispered, and those 3 words destroyed me more completely than if she'd just said yes. I don't know. After 5 years together, after promising to love me forever just 3 days ago, she didn't know if she was in love with someone else. I felt something inside me break, not just my heart, but something deeper, sense of reality, my understanding of who I was and what my life meant. All of it crumbled in that moment. I walked back inside, leaving Emma on the terrace. I needed to be alone, to process what had just happened, to figure out what I was supposed to do next. How do you continue a honeymoon when your new wife has just admitted she might be in love with someone else? How do you sleep in the same bed with someone who is thinking about another man while making love to you? The next 2 days were the longest of my life. Emma tried desperately to salvage our trip, suggesting romantic activities and acting like nothing had happened. But every time she touched me, I thought about Ryan. Every time she said she loved me, I wondered if she was comparing me to him. Every time I caught her looking at her phone, I knew exactly who she was thinking about. We barely spoke on the flight home to Portland. Emma cried quietly in her window seat while I stared at the airline magazine, trying to make sense of how my perfect life had imploded so completely in the span of a single moment. The other passengers probably thought we were exhausted from our honeymoon, not that we were returning home as strangers who happened to share the same last name. When we got back to our apartment, everything looked exactly the same but felt completely different. The wedding gifts were still piled on our dining room table, waiting to be opened and organized. Thank you cards sat in neat stacks, waiting to be written and mailed. Our wedding album had arrived while we were gone, filled with photos of what now seemed like an elaborate lie. That first night back, as we lay in our bed, the same bed where we'd slept peacefully for 3 years, I realized I had no idea who the woman next to me really was. I'd thought I'd married my best friend, my soulmate, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. Instead, I'd married someone who was in love with someone else, but had gone through with our wedding. Anyway, the worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that our entire relationship might have been built on a foundation of lies and self-deception. If Emma wasn't sure about her feelings for me on our honeymoon, when had she been sure? Had she ever really chosen me, or had? I'd just been the safe option while she figured out what she really wanted. As I lay there in the darkness, listening to Emma's breathing and wondering if she was thinking about Ryan even in her sleep, I knew that everything had changed. I couldn't unknow what I now knew. I couldn't unhear that name or unsee the guilt in her eyes when I'd asked if she loved him. I was married to a woman who wasn't sure she wanted to be married to me, and I had no idea what to do about it. Life I'd thought I was building, the future I'd imagined for us. The love I'd believed was mutual and unshakable, all of it was suddenly in question. The next morning, Emma tried to talk to me over coffee, but I couldn't find the words. What was there to say? That I forgave her. I wasn't sure I could. That I wanted to work through it. I wasn't sure it was possible that I loved her. I did. But I was beginning to understand that love alone might not be enough. Instead, I told her I needed some time to think. I packed a bag and drove to my sister Sophia's house across town. Leaving Emma alone in our apartment, with the wedding gifts and the thank you cards, and all the remnants of what was supposed to be the happiest time of our lives. That was the beginning of the end of my marriage, though I didn't know it yet. I thought I was just taking a few days to process what had happened, to figure out how to move forward. I had no idea that I was actually taking the first step on a journey that would completely transform my life. Teach me what real love actually looked like, and show me that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is also the best thing. That can happen to you. But that part of the story comes later. First, I had to learn how to survive the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and myself. Sophia's house in Southeast Portland had always been my refuge. As a pediatric nurse at OHSU, she understood pain in ways most people couldn't, and she had this ability to create healing spaces wherever she went. Her craftsman-style home was filled with warm colors, soft textures, and the kind of lived-in comfort that immediately made you feel safe. When I showed up at her door that morning with a duffel bag and red-rimmed eyes, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into a hug and led me to the guest room that had been my sanctuary during college, when life felt overwhelming. For the first week, I barely left that room. Sophia would bring me meals on a tray and sit with me while I picked at the food, not saying much but just being present. She'd worked enough trauma cases to know that sometimes healing required silence before it required words. Emma called constantly. She texted, left voicemails, even showed up at Sophia's house twice, but my sister turned her away both times. Unkindly, but firmly, she told Emma I needed space and that pushing wouldn't help anyone. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was questioning everything I thought I knew about my own judgment, my ability to read people, my understanding of what love actually meant. If I'd been so wrong about Emma, what else was I wrong about? Had I ever really known her at all? Or had I just projected what I wanted to see onto someone who was fundamentally different from who I thought she was? I spent hours lying on Sophia's guest bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying our entire relationship in my mind. Every conversation, every moment of intimacy, every time she'd seemed distant or distracted, I started to see patterns I'd missed before, or maybe patterns I'd chosen to ignore because acknowledging them would have meant admitting that something was fundamentally broken. There was the way she'd always deflected when I talked about our future beyond the wedding. I'd assumed she was just focused on getting through the big day itself. But now I wondered if she'd never really envisioned a long-term future with me at all. There was how she'd become increasingly critical of little things I did, like the way I dressed or my career choices, things she'd once said she loved about me. I thought it was just wedding stress, but maybe it was resentment building up over time. Most painfully, there was the way our physical intimacy had changed over the past year. Not just the frequency, which had decreased, but the quality of connection. I'd attributed it to busy schedules and wedding planning exhaustion, but looking back, I could see that Emma had been emotionally absent even when she was physically present. The Santorini incident wasn't an isolated moment of confusion. It was the culmination of months of her being somewhere else in her mind. After 2 weeks of this mental torture, Sophia finally sat me down for what she called a reality check conversation. We were in her kitchen on a rainy Saturday morning, drinking coffee and watching droplets race down the windows. "Jay," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're destroying yourself trying to figure out what you did wrong. That's not going to help you heal." "But I must have done something wrong," I said. "People don't just fall out of love for no reason. Maybe I wasn't ambitious enough, or romantic enough, or stop." Sophia set down her coffee mug with enough force to make me look up. "Listen to me carefully. Emma's inability to be honest with herself or with you about her feelings is not your fault. Her decision to go through with a wedding when she wasn't sure about her commitment is not your fault. Her emotional affair with Ryan is not your fault." The words emotional affair hit me like a physical blow. I'd been avoiding that phrase even in my own mind, but hearing Sophia say it out loud made it impossible to deny what had really been happening. "You're a good man who loves someone fully and honestly," Sophia continued. "The fact that she couldn't match that energy doesn't diminish your worth. It reveals hers." That conversation was the first crack in the wall of self-blame I'd built around myself. But understanding something intellectually and healing from it emotionally are two completely different things. Sophia suggested I see a therapist, someone who specialized in relationship trauma and betrayal. The idea of talking to a stranger about the most humiliating experience of my life felt impossible, but I was drowning and needed someone to throw me a lifeline. Dr. Rebecca Walsh had an office in downtown Denver, about a 3-hour drive from Portland. Sophia suggested I consider a change of scenery entirely. Maybe rent a place in the mountains for a few months while I worked through everything with Dr. Walsh. The idea of leaving Portland, of getting away from all the places that reminded me of Emma and our life together, felt both terrifying and necessary. Emma had been leaving increasingly desperate messages. She'd started showing up at places she knew I might be, at the coffee shop where I used to work, the park where we'd had our first date, even my old college campus. Sophia told me she'd been calling my parents, trying to get them to convince me to come home and work things out. The pressure was becoming unbearable, and I realized that staying in the same city as Emma would make healing impossible. 3 weeks after leaving our apartment, I made the decision to rent a cabin in the Colorado mountains outside Denver. It was a small place, barely more than a studio with a loft bedroom. But it had enormous windows overlooking a valley filled with aspen, trees, and a creek that ran year-round. The isolation felt healing rather than lonely. For the first time since Santorini, I could breathe without feeling like the air was full of broken glass. Dr. Walsh was nothing like what I'd expected. She was probably in her 50s, with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. And she had this way of asking questions that helped me discover answers I didn't know I had. Our first session was mostly me crying and trying to explain what had happened, but she didn't seem fazed by the emotional mess I'd become. "Betrayal trauma is real trauma," she told me during our second session. "Your nervous system is responding to a threat to your survival, which is what the end of a primary attachment represents to our primitive brain. You're not overreacting. You're not weak. You're having a normal response to an abnormal situation." Those words gave me permission to stop judging myself for falling apart. I'd been trying to be strong, to handle everything with maturity and grace. But the truth was that my world had been destroyed, and I was allowed to grieve that destruction. Dr. Walsh introduced me to concepts I'd never heard of before: trauma bonding, gaslighting, cognitive dissonance. She helped me understand that the confusion I'd been feeling wasn't a sign of my inadequacy, was a natural response to being in a relationship where someone's words and actions didn't match, where reality was constantly being questioned and redefined. We talked about my childhood, about growing up with parents who loved me but were often absent due to their demanding careers. Dr. Walsh helped me see how I'd learned to accept less than I deserved in relationships, how I'd become skilled at adapting myself to other people's needs while ignoring my own. Emma's emotional unavailability hadn't been a bug in our relationship. It had been a feature that felt familiar to me.
The work was exhausting.
Some days I'd leave Dr. Walsh's office feeling like I'd been emotionally excavated. Every buried hurt and unexamined assumption dragged into the light. But slowly, very slowly, I started to feel like I was building something new instead of just trying to repair something that had been broken. Living in the mountains changed me in ways I hadn't expected. The physical isolation forced me to confront myself without distractions. I couldn't escape into Netflix binges or social media scrolling. When painful thoughts arose, I had to sit with them, feel them, and eventually let them move through me. The silence was deafening at first, but gradually it became peaceful. I started hiking every day, partly for exercise, but mostly because the repetitive motion of walking and the beauty of the natural world helped quiet the constant noise in my head. There's something about being surrounded by mountains and trees that puts human problems into perspective. My marriage had ended, yes, but the world kept turning. The seasons kept changing. The creek kept flowing past my cabin, indifferent to my heartbreak, but somehow comforting in its consistency. Photography had always been a hobby of mine, something I'd done casually but never taken seriously. In the mountains, with endless beautiful scenes and nothing but time, I started to explore it more deeply. I bought a better camera and spent hours learning about composition, lighting, and post-processing. There was something therapeutic about capturing moments of beauty, about finding perfect frames in an imperfect world. The physical demands of mountain life also changed my body. I'd always been thin and not particularly strong, but daily hikes and the practical demands of living in a somewhat remote cabin started building muscle and endurance I'd never had. I learned to split wood for the fireplace, to troubleshoot the temperamental water heater, to navigate icy roads in winter. These small competencies might seem insignificant, but they were building blocks of a new identity as someone who could take care of himself. Emma's calls and texts continued for the first month, but they gradually decreased in frequency. Through Sophia, I learned that she'd moved back in with her parents temporarily. She'd told people we were working through some issues, and that I needed space to process. It was a sanitized version of the truth that protected her reputation, while making me sound like the unstable one who couldn't handle normal relationship problems. About 2 months into my mountain retreat, Marcus, my college roommate and closest friend, drove up from Austin to check on me. I hadn't been responding to anyone's calls except Sophia's, and apparently my parents were worried I'd gone completely off the grid. Marcus showed up unannounced on a Thursday morning, carrying a cooler full of beer and wearing hiking boots he'd clearly never used before. "Dude," he said when I opened the cabin door, "you look like a mountain man, and not in a bad way." It was true. I'd grown out my hair and had a beard for the first time in my life. I'd been living in flannel shirts and hiking boots, and the mountain sun had given me a tan that my pale Portland skin had never achieved. I looked like a different person, and increasingly, I felt like one too. Marcus stayed for a long weekend, and having him there reminded me how much I'd missed real friendship. Emma had never particularly liked Marcus, always finding reasons why we couldn't hang out or making snide comments about his lifestyle. Looking back, I could see how she'd gradually isolated me from most of my close friendships, not through any dramatic ultimatums, but through subtle discouragement that eventually wore down my resistance. "You know what's wild?" Marcus said, as we sat around the fireplace on his last night there. "I always thought you were settling with Emma, but I figured it wasn't my place to say anything." The comment hit me like a lightning bolt. "What do you mean, settling?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I just never saw the spark between you two that I expected to see. Like you were crazy about her, that was obvious. But from her side it always seemed more like contentment. Like she was checking boxes rather than following her heart." I asked him to explain further, and Marcus told me about conversations he'd had with other friends from college, how several of them had wondered if Emma was really as invested in our relationship as I was. Apparently there had been times when she'd seemed more interested in the idea of being in a serious relationship than in being in a serious relationship with me specifically. "The wedding was beautiful," Marcus said, "but honestly, watching her that day, she looked more excited about being a bride than about marrying you. I kept waiting to see that moment where she looked at you like you were her whole world, and it just didn't happen." These observations were painful to hear, but they confirmed suspicions I'd been trying to suppress for years. I'd been so focused on my own feelings, so grateful that someone like Emma had chosen me. that I'd ignored the signs that she might not have been choosing me so much as choosing the stability and security I represented. After Marcus left, I spent weeks processing what he'd told me. It reframed our entire relationship in a way that was both devastating and oddly liberating. If Emma had never been fully present in our relationship, then losing her wasn't actually losing something real. It was finally acknowledging that what I'd thought we had been largely in my imagination. Dr. Walsh helped me understand that. This realization was actually progress, even though it felt like another layer of grief. I wasn't just mourning the end of my marriage. I was mourning the fact that the marriage I'd thought I had probably never existed at all. But accepting that reality was the only way to move forward authentically. But beautiful. No. The isolation that had felt healing in the fall became more challenging when temperatures dropped and snow made even simple errands into major expeditions. But there was something powerful about surviving those conditions, about proving to myself that I could handle difficulty without falling apart. I started reading voraciously, something I hadn't done since college. Philosophy, psychology, memoirs of people who'd overcome major life challenges. I was hungry for wisdom, for frameworks that could help me make sense of what had happened and who I wanted to become moving forward. Viktor Frankl's writings on finding meaning in suffering particularly resonated with me, as did Brené Brown's work on vulnerability and shame. The photography hobby had evolved into something more serious. I'd started a small Instagram account showcasing mountain landscapes and wildlife, and it was gaining followers steadily. Several local businesses had reached out about purchasing prints for their offices. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was the first creative work I'd done in years that felt truly mine. Untainted by Emma's opinions or expectations. By spring, I'd been in the mountains for almost 6 months. The aspen trees were budding, the creek was running high with snowmelt, and I felt fundamentally different from the broken man who'd arrived the previous fall. I wasn't healed completely. Dr. Walsh warned me that trauma recovery wasn't linear and that I'd probably have setbacks. But I was stronger, both physically and emotionally, than I'd ever been. The divorce papers arrived on a warm May morning. Emma had filed, citing irreconcilable differences. There was no mention of Ryan, no acknowledgement of what had actually caused our marriage to implode. It's just a clinical document that reduced 5 years of my life to a series of asset divisions and legal obligations. I felt surprisingly little emotion reading through it. The man who'd left Portland 6 months earlier would have been devastated. The man I'd become saw it as a necessary step toward freedom. Sophia called that afternoon to check on me. She'd been my lifeline throughout the mountain retreat, the only person I'd maintained regular contact with. I could hear the worry in her voice when she asked how I was handling the divorce papers. "I'm okay," I told her, and realized I actually meant it. "I think I'm ready to rejoin the world." "What does that look like?" she asked. I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. Portland held too many memories, too many people who would always see me as half of Jake and Emma. I needed to start completely fresh somewhere new. Somewhere I could build a life based on who I'd become rather than who I'd been. "I think I'm going to try Austin," I said. "Marcus has been telling me about the art scene there, and it's far enough from Portland to feel like a real fresh start. Austin, Texas." Sophia sounded surprised. "It's a big change from mountain hermit life." I laughed, realizing it was the first time I'd laughed spontaneously in months. "Yeah, well, I think I'm ready for a big change. I'm not the same person who got married 8 months ago, and I don't want to pretend to be." That conversation marked the beginning of the next phase of my journey. I'd survived the destruction of my old life and the brutal process of rebuilding my sense of self. Now it was time to test whether the person I'd become could thrive in the real world. could build meaningful connections with new people, could create something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Looking back, those months in the Colorado mountains were the most difficult and most necessary of my life. I'd gone there as a victim, someone who'd been betrayed and broken by circumstances beyond my control. I was leaving as a survivor, someone who'd chosen to use his pain as fuel for growth rather than as an excuse for bitterness. And the cabin that had been my refuge was ready to become someone else's fresh start. As I packed my belongings and loaded my car for the drive to Austin, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: excitement about the future. Not because I knew what was coming, but because I finally trusted myself to handle whatever it might bring. The mountains had taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Dr. Walsh had taught me that healing was possible, that trauma could become wisdom if you were willing to do the work. The photography had taught me to see beauty in unexpected places, to find perfect moments in imperfect circumstances. Most importantly, the isolation had taught me that I could be alone without being lonely, that my worth wasn't dependent on someone else's validation, that real love had too. Start with loving myself. As I drove away from the cabin for the last time, watching the mountains shrink in my rearview mirror, I felt like I was finally ready to discover what my life could become when it was truly mine. Austin hit me like a wave of energy and possibility. After months of mountain silence, the city's vibrant chaos felt overwhelming at first, but in the best possible way. The music spilling out of every bar, the food trucks on seemingly every corner, the eclectic mix of tech workers and artists and musicians all coexisting in this sprawling Texas metropolis. It was exactly the kind of sensory overload I needed. To shock my system back to life, Marcus had helped me find a loft apartment in East Austin, a converted warehouse that housed about 20 units filled with creative types. My neighbors included a sculptor who worked in reclaimed metal, indie band that practiced in the evenings, and a couple who designed sustainable furniture. It was the kind of community I'd never experienced before, where people were genuinely interested in each other's work and passionate about their craft. The loft itself was nothing like the cozy apartment I'd shared with Emma or the rustic cabin, where I'd spent my healing months. It was all exposed brick and industrial fixtures, with concrete floors and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The space felt like a blank canvas, which was exactly what I needed. I could create whatever life I wanted here without the weight of previous expectations or memories. My first week in Austin, I did nothing but explore. I walked through neighborhoods with names like South Lamar and the French Quarter, discovering coffee shops tucked into converted houses and galleries showing work by local artists. The city had this incredible energy of creativity and entrepreneurship, where it seemed like everyone was working on some passion project or startup idea. It was infectious in a way that made me want to dive headfirst into whatever came next. The photography portfolio I'd built during my mountain retreat became my calling card. I'd printed some of my best landscape shots and created a simple website showcasing my work. Within 2 weeks of arriving, I'd connected with several local businesses who were interested in commissioning pieces for their spaces. A new restaurant in the downtown area wanted custom prints for their dining room. A tech startup was looking for artwork that captured the natural beauty of Texas for their office lobby. But the real breakthrough came when I discovered Canvas, an light and art gallery in South Austin that specialized in emerging photographers and mixed media artists. The space was housed in a converted church, with soaring ceilings and natural light that made everything displayed their look ethereal. I'd spent an hour wandering through their current exhibition when the owner approached me. "You've been studying every piece pretty intensely," she said with a warm smile. "Are you an artist yourself?" Olivia Chen was probably around my age, with an infectious enthusiasm for art that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with photography. In the first place, she had this way of talking about visual composition and emotional storytelling that made me realize how much I'd been missing by treating my photography as just a hobby. When I showed her some of my work on my phone, her eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "These mountain shots are incredible," she said, scrolling through my portfolio. "The way you capture light and shadow, the emotional depth in these landscapes. This isn't amateur work." "How long have you been shooting professionally?" I explained that I'd only recently started taking photography seriously. that it had been a form of therapy during a difficult period in my life. Olivia listened with the kind of attention that made me feel like my story mattered, like my art mattered. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a moment, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Would you be interested in showing some pieces here?" she asked. "We have a group exhibition coming up in 2 months featuring photographers who work with natural landscapes. These would fit perfectly, and I think our audience would really respond to the emotional quality of your work." The opportunity felt surreal. 6 months earlier, I'd been a broken man hiding in the mountains, convinced that my life was over. Now, I was being invited to display my art in a real gallery, to share the visual story of my healing journey with complete strangers. I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Preparing for the exhibition became my full-time focus. Olivia introduced me to David Kim, her business partner and a successful photographer in his own right, who helped me understand the technical aspects of gallery printing and presentation. David had this perfectionist approach to his craft that pushed me to think more seriously about every decision. From paper selection to frame choices to the sequencing of pieces within a series. "Art isn't just about capturing a beautiful moment," David told me during one of our printing sessions. "It's about communicating something essential about the human experience. Your mountain series does that, tells a story about solitude and resilience and finding beauty in isolation. That's what makes it powerful." Working with David and Olivia, I began to understand that my photography wasn't just documentation of pretty scenery. Each image carried emotional weight, told part of a larger narrative about transformation and survival. The series I'd created, without even realizing it, chronicled my journey from brokenness to strength, from confusion to clarity, from isolation to readiness for connection. The weeks leading up to the exhibition were some of the most fulfilling of my life. I was working 18-hour days, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like purpose. I was collaborating with people who shared my passion for visual storytelling, learning new skills, pushing myself creatively in ways I'd never imagined possible. For the first time since Santorini, I woke up each morning excited about what the day might bring. Olivia and I spent countless hours together planning the exhibition layout, discussing the emotional arc of the mountain series, debating which pieces would create the strongest impact. She had this incredible ability to see potential in my work, that I couldn't see myself, to articulate the deeper meanings behind images I'd captured instinctively. Our professional collaboration felt natural and easy, but I started noticing something else developing between us. It began with small moments. The way she'd light up when she talked about a particular photograph, her hands moving expressively, as she described how the composition made her feel, how she'd bring me coffee during long printing sessions, somehow knowing exactly how I liked it prepared, the way our conversations would drift from art to personal stories, sharing details about our lives that went far beyond professional necessity. Olivia had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of parents who'd immigrated from Taiwan and built a successful import business. She'd studied art history at Berkeley, then spent several years working for established galleries in Los Angeles, before deciding she wanted to create something of her own. Canvas and light was her dream made manifest. A space where emerging artists could find their audience and established collectors could discover new voices. Her passion for her work was infectious, but what drew me to her most was her emotional intelligence. She had this ability to read people, to understand what they needed before they knew it themselves. When I told her about my divorce, about the journey that had led me to Austin, she listened without judgment or unsolicited advice. She didn't try to fix me or offer empty platitudes about everything happening for a reason. She just heard me, fully and completely, in a way I hadn't been heard in years. "You know what I love about your mountain series?" she said one evening as we were finalizing the exhibition installation. "It's honest about pain without wallowing in it. There's this underlying message of hope, of transformation, that comes through even in the most desolate landscapes. That takes real courage to capture." The way she understood my work felt like she understood me in a fundamental way, not just the surface-level details of my personality, but the deeper currents of who I was and who I was becoming. It was completely different from my relationship with Emma. where I'd always felt like I was performing a version of myself that she might find acceptable. 3 weeks before the exhibition opening, Olivia suggested we take a road trip to Big Bend National Park to shoot some Texas landscapes that might complement the Colorado mountain series. The idea of collaborative photography excited me, and the chance to explore more of my new state with someone who shared my artistic vision felt like the perfect adventure. We drove south through Austin's sprawling suburbs, past small towns with names like Dripping Springs and Wimberley, talking about art and life and the weird trajectory that had brought us both to this moment. Olivia told me about her previous relationship with a lawyer from Los Angeles who'd never understood her passion for supporting emerging artists, who'd constantly pressured her to pursue more practical career options. I shared more details about Emma, about the slow erosion of trust and connection that had culminated in that devastating moment in Santorini. "It sounds like you were both settling," Olivia said as we drove through the hill country outside San Antonio. "You were settling for someone who didn't really see you, and she was settling for security instead of passion. That's not anyone's fault, really. It's just incompatible needs masquerading as love." Her perspective on my failed marriage was different from Dr. Walsh's therapeutic framework or Marcus's loyal friendship. Olivia saw it through the lens of artistic authenticity, as a story about two people who'd tried to create something beautiful together but lacked the raw materials necessary for true collaboration. It was a gentler way of understanding what had happened, one that didn't require assigning blame or cataloging failures. Big Bend was an entirely new experience for me. The landscape was rugged and unfamiliar, filled with striking red rock formations and desert plants that somehow flourished in the harshest of conditions. Yet there was a raw, compelling beauty in it that pushed me both creatively and emotionally. While the mountains of Colorado had offered peace and solitude, the Texas desert was about strength and survival, about discovering life in places that seemed barren. Olivia proved to be an incredible photography partner. She noticed compositions I would have overlooked, and had a deep understanding of light that greatly sharpened my technical abilities. We'd rise before dawn to catch that golden light, then use the hottest parts of the day to review our shots and plan our next outings. Evenings were spent around the campfire, talking about everything and nothing under a sky filled with stars. On our third night, something shifted between us. Earlier that day, we'd hiked to a secluded overlook and captured the Rio Grande as it curved through the canyon, an exhausting trek that left us feeling accomplished and closer than ever. That night, as we sat beside the fire under the clearest sky I'd ever seen, Olivia edged closer on the log we were sharing. "Jake," she said gently, "there's something I need to tell you." My stomach clenched. Ow. In my experience, those words never led anywhere good. I expected her to say she was involved with someone else or that mixing personal feelings with professional partnership wasn't a good idea. But instead, she turned to me, her eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire. "I'm falling for you," she confessed. "It's not just as a creative partner or a friend, but as you. I know the timing's tricky and that you're still recovering from your divorce, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way." Her honesty and vulnerability took me by surprise. In my marriage with Emma, conversations about emotions had been guarded and full of subtext. Olivia's openness felt like stepping into sunlight after years in shadow. "I feel the same," I admitted. "But I'm scared that I'll mess it up, that I'm still too broken to be in something healthy." She took my hand in hers, steady and warm. "Right. Then let's promise to be honest with ourselves and each other about what we feel, what we fear, and what we want. Let's build something real, not perfect. Something grounded in who we actually are." Her suggestion was so simple it felt revolutionary. No roles to play, no masks, just two people showing up as themselves and seeing what could grow from that. I kissed her, tasting the mix of campfire smoke and possibility. It wasn't the urgent, chaotic passion I'd once shared with Emma. This felt calm, grounded, like finding home in an unexpected place. The rest of our time in Big Bend became an exploration of this new intimacy. We opened up to each other in ways I hadn't thought possible. Olivia shared her fears about running her own photography business and the pressure of standing out in a competitive field. I revealed my insecurities, leftovers from my marriage, and my fear that I might be unfit for love. Driving back to Austin, the desert gradually turning into rolling hills and then suburban sprawl, Olivia said something that stuck with me. "Your marriage didn't fail because you're broken," she said. "It failed because you and Emma were trying to build something with ingredients you didn't have. But that doesn't mean you can't create something beautiful with the right person." Our exhibit opening was scheduled for a Friday evening in October. Just as the Texas heat gave way to cooler days and Austin's cultural scene picked up pace, the gallery, canvas, and light had done a good job promoting the show, but I had no idea what kind of crowd to expect. Olivia reassured me that openings usually drew collectors, fellow artists, and curious locals, but I was still nervous. To display something so personal, that afternoon I stood in the gallery, staring at my Mountain Series, each photograph framed and perfectly lit. The collection told the story of my emotional journey so vividly, it felt almost too intimate to share.
One image from the first.
Week in the cabin stood out a snow-covered, empty landscape, beautiful but bleak. As the series went on, life and color slowly returned, ending with a hopeful spring shot of budding aspen trees under a bright blue sky. "They're stunning," Olivia said, joining me. "Should be proud of this." The reception exceeded every expectation. The gallery filled with people who didn't just glance at the work, they really engaged with it. Fellow photographers introduced themselves and offered encouragement. One collector from Dallas even said he wanted to buy the entire series for his office. But what moved me most happened near the end of the evening. An older woman had been standing in front of one photograph for nearly 20 minutes, the one I took during my lowest moment in the mountains. It showed a solitary tree bent by the wind under a stormy sky, damaged but not broken. "This photo," she said softly, "helped me see something in my own life. I've been struggling to move on after a painful divorce, but this shows me it's possible to weather the storm and still be whole, still be beautiful." That conversation crystallized everything I'd come to understand about art, healing, and connection. What began as a personal coping mechanism had become something more, a way to help others find meaning in their own pain. Later that night, Olivia and I walked through the quiet streets of South Austin. Still glowing from the success of the evening, several prints had sold, and people had expressed interest in future commissions. But more than the recognition, it was the emotional resonance of the work that mattered. It created something real, not just in the photographs, but in each other. More importantly, the exhibition had established me as a serious artist in Austin's creative community. "You know what this means, right?" Olivia said, as we sat on a bench outside a late-night taco truck, sharing a plate of street corn and watching the city's nightlife unfold around us, so that I can actually make a living as a photographer. She laughed and nudged my shoulder. "Well, yes, that too. But I was thinking more that you've completely transformed your life. A year ago you were married to someone who didn't really see you. Tonight, a room full of people connected with your vision and your story. You've built something authentic and beautiful from what felt like complete destruction." Looking back at everything that had led to that moment, the devastating honeymoon, revelation, the months of therapy and healing in the mountains, the leap of faith to move to Austin, the decision to pursue photography seriously, could see that each painful step had been necessary for the next phase of growth. "I couldn't have done any of this alone," I told Olivia. "Not just the exhibition, but the whole journey of figuring out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be. That's the beautiful thing about real partnership," she said, taking my hand as we walked back toward my loft. "It's about two whole people choosing to build something together that's bigger than what either could create alone." That night, as we lay in my loft with the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt something I'd never experienced before: complete contentment with the present moment, combined with genuine excitement about the future. Not because I knew what was coming next, but because I trusted myself to handle whatever challenges and opportunities might arise. The success of the exhibition opened doors I hadn't even known existed. Within a month, I had commissions from 3 different businesses, inquiries from collectors in Houston and San Antonio, and an invitation to participate in a group show at a gallery in Santa Fe. My photography was evolving from therapeutic documentation into professional artistic practice, with real commercial and critical potential. But more than the career success, What mattered was the relationship I was building with Olivia. We'd moved beyond the initial excitement of new romance into something deeper and more sustainable. We challenged each other creatively, supported each other professionally, and created space for individual growth within our partnership. "You know what I love most about us?" Olivia said one evening as we worked together in her gallery, preparing for the next month's exhibition. "We're both whole people who choose to be together rather than broken people trying to fix each other." That distinction captured everything I'd learned about love and partnership over the past year. My marriage with Emma had been built on mutual neediness and unexamined assumptions about what relationships should look like. What Olivia and I were creating was based on conscious choice, ongoing communication, and a shared commitment to supporting each other's authentic selves. As winter settled over Austin and we planned our first holiday season together, I realized that my life had become something I'd never imagined possible. Not just successful or happy, but genuinely fulfilling in ways that went beyond external achievements or relationship status. I'd learned to create meaning and beauty from pain, to build authentic connections based on mutual respect and shared values, and to trust myself enough to take risks in service of growth and possibility. The man who'd left Santorini broken and confused felt like a different person entirely. Not because I'd forgotten what happened or minimized the pain of that experience, but because I'd used that pain as raw material for creating something better. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me had become the catalyst for discovering who I really was and what I was truly capable of achieving. 2 years had passed since I'd left Portland, and life in Austin had settled into a rhythm I'd never thought possible. My photography business was thriving beyond anything I'd imagined. What had started as therapeutic mountain landscapes had evolved into a diverse portfolio spanning corporate commissions, fine art sales, and editorial work for national magazines. The gallery exhibition had been just the beginning of a career trajectory that felt both surreal and deeply earned. Olivia and I had moved in together the previous spring, finding a house in Travis Heights with a converted garage that served as my studio and darkroom. Our relationship had deepened in ways that continued to surprise me. Unlike the constant negotiation and compromise that had characterized my marriage with Emma, being with Olivia felt effortless. We challenged each other creatively, supported each other's individual goals, and had built something that enhanced both our lives without diminishing either of our identities. The irony wasn't lost on me that the worst thing that had ever happened to me had led directly to the best period of my life. But I'd learned in therapy that trauma and growth weren't mutually exclusive, that some of the most profound transformations emerged from the deepest wounds. My experience with Emma had taught me what I didn't want in a relationship, which made it possible to recognize and appreciate what I had with Olivia. Marcus had been visiting frequently from his new job in Denver, marveling at how completely my life had transformed. During his most recent trip, we'd spent an afternoon at Zilker Park, watching people paddleboard on Lady Bird Lake while catching up on 2 years' worth of changes. "Dude," he'd said, shaking his head as he watched me interact with a group of local photographers who'd recognized me from my recent magazine feature, "you're like a completely different person. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You seem actually happy, not just content or distracted, like genuinely fulfilled." He was right. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was living authentically rather than performing a role. Someone else had written for me. My work mattered to me. My relationship was built on mutual respect and genuine affection. And I'd cultivated friendships with people who knew and appreciated who I really was. Which is why the phone call from Sophia on a Tuesday morning in March felt like a bomb going off in my carefully constructed new reality. "Jake," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice immediately. "I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to hear it from anyone else." My stomach dropped. Sophia only used that tone when she was delivering news that was going to hurt. I set down my camera and walked out to the back porch, needing fresh air for whatever was coming. "Emma's getting married," she said without preamble. "The wedding is next month. And before you ask, yes, it's to Ryan." The information hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known this day would eventually come. Emma and Ryan had been together since shortly after our divorce was finalized. According to the sparse updates I'd received through mutual friends, but knowing something intellectually and having it confirmed as legal reality were two completely different experiences. How long have they been engaged? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. About 6 months, apparently. Emma's been posting about it on social media pretty regularly. Sophia paused, then added gently, "There's something else. The wedding is in Portland, and a lot of people we know are invited." Marcus got an invitation, which is weird since he barely knows Emma, but I think she's trying to make some kind of statement about moving on with her life. The pettiness of inviting my closest friend to her wedding would have devastated me 2 years earlier. Now it just seemed sad, like a transparent attempt to prove something to an audience that had largely moved on from caring about her personal drama. But the fact that she was getting married in Portland, surrounded by all the same people who'd witnessed our wedding, felt like a more direct provocation. "I'm not going, obviously," Sophia continued. "But I wanted you to know, because Tyler. Thompson has been reaching out to people, trying to get them to convince you to attend. Apparently Emma told her family that she wants to make peace with you, to show there are no hard feelings." Right. The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost impressive. Emma knew exactly which emotional buttons to push to make people feel sorry for her, to position herself as the mature one trying to heal old wounds while painting me as petty and vindictive for maintaining my distance. It was the same pattern of behavior that had characterized our entire relationship, just applied to our post-divorce dynamic. "What did you tell Tyler?" I asked. "That if Emma wanted to make peace with you, she could reach out directly instead of using intermediaries to apply pressure. That your absence from her wedding isn't about holding grudge, it's about healthy boundaries." After I hung up with Sophia, I sat on the back porch for a long time, trying to process the complex. A mix of emotions the news had triggered. There was relief that I felt mostly indifferent to. Emma's happiness with Ryan. There was gratitude that I'd built a life so far removed from that world that her choices no longer affected me directly. But there was also anger at the presumption that I should participate in some kind of performative reconciliation for her benefit. Olivia found me there an hour later, when she came home from the gallery for lunch. She took one look at my face and sat down beside me without saying anything, waiting for me to explain what had happened. "Emma's getting married," I said. "To Ryan in 8 months." In Portland, Olivia processed this information quietly, her hand finding mine on the porch railing. "How are you feeling about it? Honestly, mostly fine. It makes sense that they'd end up together. They were probably better suited for each other than Emma and I ever were. But her family is apparently trying to guilt-trip people into convincing me to attend the wedding, and that part pisses me off. Because they're trying to manipulate you into participating in something that serves her narrative rather than respecting your boundaries," Olivia said, immediately understanding the deeper issue. This was what I loved most about being with Olivia. She didn't try to fix my feelings or offer simplistic advice about forgiveness and moving on. She understood that my anger wasn't about Emma specifically, but about the pattern of emotional manipulation that had characterized so much of our relationship. She saw the situation clearly and validated my right to protect myself from unnecessary drama. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "Nothing," I said immediately. "I want to ignore all of it and focus on our life here. I don't owe Emma or her family anything, and I'm not going to let them drag me back into their dysfunction just because it would make them feel better about their choices." "That sounds like a healthy decision," Olivia said, kissing my temple. "But also know that if any of this brings up stuff you need to process, I'm here for whatever you need." That evening, Marcus called to tell me he'd declined his invitation to Emma's wedding. "I told them I had a work conflict," he said, "but honestly, even if I didn't, I wouldn't go. It feels disrespectful to you and also like she's trying to use our friendship as some kind of prop in her redemption story. His loyalty meant more to me than I could express. During my marriage, I'd often felt like I had to choose between Emma's comfort and my other relationships. Having friends who prioritized my well-being over social expectations was still something I was learning to accept and appreciate. The wedding came and went without further drama. Sophia sent me a few photos from social media. I looked beautiful. In an elaborate gown, Ryan looked appropriately handsome in his tuxedo. and the whole event had the glossy perfection of a magazine shoot. I felt nothing looking at the images except a distant curiosity about how much the whole production had cost. What I didn't expect was the phone call that came 3 weeks after the wedding. I was in my studio, editing photos from a recent commission. Shoot, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Jake, it's Tyler Thompson, Emma's brother." I hadn't spoken to Tyler since the early days of my divorce when he'd called to express his regret about how everything had unfolded. He'd always been the most reasonable member of Emma's family, the one who'd seemed to understand that relationships sometimes ended without anyone being completely at fault. "Tyler," I said, genuinely surprised to hear from him. "Congratulations." "On Emma's wedding? I hope it was a beautiful day." "It was," he said, but his tone was strange, hesitant in a way that put me on edge. "Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. Something happened at the reception that I thought you should know about." My stomach tightened. "What kind of something?" Tyler was quiet for a moment, like he was trying to figure out how to explain whatever he needed to tell me. "Emma got pretty drunk during the dinner reception, like more drunk than I've ever seen her," she started. "Talking about you, in front of a table full of Ryan's family and friends? Talking about me? How?" She was saying that marrying Ryan felt like settling. She'd made a mistake divorcing you, that she'd realized too late what she'd lost. Tyler's voice was pained. "Jake, she said all this stuff about how you were the love of her life, and she'd thrown it away for nothing. Ryan heard everything. His parents heard everything. It was mortifying. The information was so unexpected that I had trouble processing it. Emma had spent our entire relationship making me feel like I wasn't. Enough like I was the consolation prize rather than her first choice. Now, apparently, she was telling people the opposite story." "What did Ryan do?" I asked. "He left. Just walked out of his own wedding reception. Emma's been trying to reach him for weeks, but he's not returning her calls. Word is, he's staying. With friends and considering whether he wants to stay married." The irony was staggering. Emma had destroyed our marriage by being emotionally involved with Ryan. Now she'd potentially destroyed her marriage to Ryan by publicly declaring her feelings for me. It was like watching someone make the same mistake over and over again, never learning from the consequences of their choices. "Tyler, why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Emma's been talking about reaching out to you, about trying to apologize and see if there's any chance of reconciliation. And I thought you deserved a heads up so you could decide how to handle it if she contacts you. The idea of Emma trying to restart something between us would have been devastating 2 years earlier, and I was still raw from the betrayal and desperate for any sign that our relationship had meant something to her. God, now it just felt exhausting, like being asked to participate in a drama I'd already resolved for. Myself. "I appreciate the warning," I told Tyler. "But I hope you can make Emma understand that I've moved on completely. I'm in a serious relationship with someone who makes me incredibly happy, and I have no interest in revisiting the past." "I figured as much," Tyler said. "Sophia mentioned you were doing really well in Austin. I'm happy for you, Jake. You deserve better than the chaos Emma seems determined to create in her life." After we hung up, I sat in my studio trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Emma's public confession at her own wedding reception revealed something I'd never fully understood about our relationship. Maybe she had loved me in her own complicated way. Maybe her inability to commit fully to our marriage hadn't been about my inadequacy as a partner, but about her own fears and confusion about what she actually wanted. But understanding Emma's motivations didn't change the fundamental truth that we'd been wrong for each other. Love without compatibility, passion, without respect, attraction, without genuine friendship, none of those combinations created sustainable relationships. What Emma and I had shared might have been real, but it hadn't been healthy or lasting. When Olivia came home that evening, I told her about Tyler's call and Emma's wedding reception meltdown. She listened without judgment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Are you worried she's going to try to contact you?" Little I admitted. "Not because I have any interest in talking to her, but because I know how persistent she can be when she wants something. And I don't want her drama affecting our life together." "What if we went away for a few weeks?" Olivia suggested. There's that artist residency in New Mexico I've been wanting to apply for. We could make it a working vacation, give you some distance, while this whole situation hopefully resolves itself. The residency was at a retreat center outside Santa Fe, designed for visual artists who wanted to explore the intersection of landscape and personal narrative. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that would advance both our careers while removing us from any potential drama with Emma. More importantly, it was Olivia's solution-oriented approach to protecting our relationship without asking me to. Cut off all ties to my past. We spent the next week preparing applications for the residency, gathering portfolios and artist statements that would demonstrate our readiness for the program. The process of articulating my artistic vision and goals reminded me how much my work had evolved since those early mountain photographs. I was no longer creating art as therapy. I was creating art as communication. It's a way of connecting with audiences who might find meaning in my visual exploration of transformation and resilience. The acceptance email came 3 days later, offering us a month-long residency starting in 2 weeks. The timing felt providential, like the universe was providing exactly the escape we needed at exactly the right moment. As we packed for New Mexico, I realized that Emma's wedding drama had served an unexpected purpose. It had forced me to examine how completely I'd moved on from that chapter of my life, how immune I'd become to her attempts at manipulation and control. 2 years earlier, the news that she was questioning her marriage and considering reconciliation would have sent me into an emotional tailspin. Now it just felt like someone else's problem, a drama I could observe from a safe distance without being drawn back into the chaos. The morning we left for Santa Fe, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart rate spiked as I realized it was probably Emma, finally reaching out directly instead of working through intermediaries. The message was exactly what I had expected, a long, rambling apology that was really a disguised attempt at reopening communication. She talked about realizing she'd made a mistake, about understanding now what she'd lost, about hoping we could find a way to be friends again. She mentioned her marriage troubles obliquely, suggesting that some mistakes were too big to recover from, but that others might be fixable with enough effort and goodwill. I showed the message to Olivia, who read it with the same expression she wore when examining a piece of art that was technically competent but emotionally manipulative. "She's still doing it," Olivia said. "Still trying to control the narrative. Still making everything about her needs and her timeline. Even her apology is really about what she wants from you." I deleted the message without responding, then blocked the number. It felt like closing a door that had been left slightly ajar for too long, finally sealing off a part of my life that had already ended in every way that mattered. As we drove through the Texas hill country toward New Mexico, I felt the last lingering threads of connection to my old life finally snapping. Emma's wedding, her public confession, her attempt to reconnect all of it belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. I was Jake Martinez, successful photographer, loving partner to Olivia Chen, creator of art that helped people process their own experiences of loss and renewal. The man who'd been devastated on a honeymoon in Santorini felt like a character from someone else's story, someone I could remember with compassion, but no longer identified with personally. I'd been transformed not just by trauma and therapy, but by the experience of building something authentic and meaningful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" I told Olivia as we crossed the state line into New Mexico. The landscape opening up into the vast desert expanses that had become some of my favorite subjects to photograph. "What's that?" "That Emma's crisis doesn't feel like my crisis anymore. That I can hear about her problems and feel genuinely disconnected from them. It means I've really moved on, not just convinced myself I have." Olivia reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's what healthy boundaries look like," she said. "Being able to wish someone well from a distance without feeling responsible for their happiness or obligated to participate in their drama." The artist residency in New Mexico turned out to be one of the most productive and fulfilling experiences of my career. Surrounded by other artists who were exploring themes of identity, transformation, and place, I created a new body of work that built on everything I'd learned about turning personal experience into universal narrative. The desert landscapes provided a perfect backdrop for examining questions of resilience and adaptation, of finding beauty in harsh conditions and thriving in unexpected environments. More importantly, the residency gave Olivia and me the space to envision our future together without the shadow of my past hanging over us. We talked about marriage, about the possibility of starting a family, about the kind of life we wanted to build together. These conversations felt completely different from the ones I'd had with Emma, which had always carried an undercurrent of negotiation and compromise. With Olivia, planning our future felt like collaborative art making, two creative people combining their visions to create something neither could have imagined alone. When we returned to Austin after the residency, I felt like I'd passed some kind of final test. Emma's attempt to re-enter my life had been met with complete indifference. Her drama deflected by the strength of what Olivia and I had built together. I was no longer someone who could be pulled back into toxic patterns by guilt or nostalgia or unresolved feelings. I was finally completely free. 5 years later, I stood in the same gallery where my journey as a serious artist had begun. But this time I wasn't the emerging photographer hoping for validation. Canvas and Light was hosting a retrospective of my work, showcasing the evolution from those raw mountain landscapes to my current series exploring themes of rebirth and human resilience. The walls displayed a decade of growth, pain transformed into purpose, broken pieces reassembled into something stronger than the original. Olivia moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd built something meaningful from nothing. Canvas and Light had expanded into 3 locations across Texas. She'd become one of the most respected gallery owners in the Southwest. But more than her professional success, what struck me was how effortlessly we moved together through the evening. Two people who'd learned to support each other's dreams while maintaining their individual identities. The ring in my jacket pocket had been there for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Not because I was uncertain about my feelings, but because I wanted to choose a time that honored what we'd built together, rather than marking it with arbitrary romance. Tonight, surrounded by the visual story of my transformation and the community we'd created, felt perfect. Marcus had flown in from Denver with his new girlfriend, a veterinarian named Claire, who shared his love of adventure and terrible puns. Sophia was there with her husband and their twin daughters, who'd adopted me as their favorite uncle despite living 1,200 miles away. David Kim had brought several collectors from Los Angeles who were interested in commissioning large-scale pieces for their corporate spaces. The opening remarks came from Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a respected art critic from Houston who'd been following my work since the first exhibition. She spoke about the arc of the retrospective, how it documented not just artistic development, but human healing. The way trauma could become the raw material for creation that helped others process their own difficult experiences. Jake Martinez represents something essential about contemporary American art, Dr. Hernandez said to the assembled crowd. His work demonstrates that our most painful experiences need not define us as victims, but can become the foundation for helping others find meaning in their own struggles. This retrospective isn't just about one man's journey from heartbreak to healing. It's about the universal human capacity for transformation. As she spoke, I noticed a familiar figure near the back of the gallery. Sophia followed my gaze and squeezed my arm reassuringly. Emma stood by herself, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered, studying one of my earliest mountain photographs with an expression I couldn't read from across the room. She'd cut her hair short and traded her usual designer clothes for something more understated. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there during our marriage, and she carried herself with less of the confident energy that had once drawn me to her. She looked like someone who'd learned hard lessons about the consequences of her choices. Olivia appeared at my side, having noticed Emma as well. "Do you want me to ask security to escort her out?" she asked quietly. "No," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "She's not here to cause trouble. She's here because she needs to see what became of the life she walked away from." After Dr. Hernandez finished her remarks, I gave a brief speech thanking everyone who'd supported my artistic journey. I talked about the power of community, about the way art could transform personal pain into shared understanding, about the unexpected gifts that sometimes emerged from our worst moments. I didn't mention Emma specifically, but I could see her, listening intently from her position near the exit. The evening progressed with the easy rhythm of a successful opening. Sales were strong, critics were engaged, and the energy in the room felt celebratory rather than merely polite. Around 9 o'clock, as the crowd began to thin, Emma approached me during a quiet moment near the desert series I'd created during the New Mexico residency. "Hello, Jake," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I hope it's okay that—" "I came tonight, of course," I said, genuinely meaning it. "These events are open to the public," she nodded, looking uncertain about how to continue. "I've been following your career from a distance. Your work is incredible, really powerful and moving." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, both of us probably remembering the last time we'd spoken. When she tried to reconnect after her wedding reception disaster. That marriage had ended in divorce within 6 months, I'd heard through Sophia. Though Emma had apparently learned from her mistakes and handled the second divorce with more dignity than she'd shown during ours. "I owe you an apology," Emma said. "Finally, not just for Santorini, though that was unforgivable. For all of it. It's for marrying you when I wasn't ready to be married to anyone. For wasting years of both our lives trying to force something that was never going to work." Apology was different from the manipulative messages she'd sent years earlier. There was no hidden agenda, no attempt to reopen communication or suggest reconciliation. She seemed to understand that this conversation was about closure, not connection. "I appreciate that," I said. "But you don't need my forgiveness to move forward with your life. I hope you've found the happiness you were looking for." "I'm working on it," she said, with a sad smile. "Mostly trying to understand why I keep sabotaging good things in my life. Trying to learn how to be alone without being lonely." Olivia joined us then, introducing herself with the kind of gracious professionalism that put everyone at ease. Emma complimented the gallery and asked thoughtful questions about Olivia's curatorial vision. There was no tension or competition between them, just two women who'd played different roles in my life, acknowledging each other with mutual respect. "I should go," Emma said after a few minutes. "I just wanted to see the exhibition and say what I needed to say. I'm genuinely happy for both of you. You've built something beautiful together." After she left, Olivia and I finished closing down the gallery in comfortable silence. The retrospective had been everything I'd hoped for and more, but Emma's unexpected appearance had added a layer of completion I hadn't realized I needed. "How do you feel about seeing her?" Olivia asked, as we locked up the gallery and walked to our car. "Grateful," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. "Grateful that she gave me the opportunity to realize how completely I've moved on. Grateful that I felt nothing but compassion for her. No anger or resentment or unfinished business. Grateful that what we have together is so solid that her presence couldn't shake it even slightly." We drove home through the quiet Austin streets, past the landmarks that had become the geography of our shared life. The house in Travis Heights where we'd learned to live together. The coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation about the future. The park where we'd spent countless mornings walking and planning and dreaming about what came next. On our back porch under the same stars where I'd once processed the devastating news of Emma's wedding, I got down on one knee and asked Olivia to marry me. The ring was simple and elegant, chosen not because it was what I thought she wanted, but because it reminded me of her strong, beautiful, and perfectly suited to the life we'd built together. She said yes, of course, but what mattered more was the conversation that followed. We talked about what marriage meant to us, about the kind of partnership we wanted to create, about the lessons we'd both learned from previous relationships that had taught us what not to repeat. Our wedding 6 months later was nothing like the elaborate production Emma and I had staged. We exchanged vows in the botanical gardens where we'd had our first official date surrounded by 50 people who'd genuinely supported our relationship from the beginning. Sophia officiated, Marcus served as best man, and David Kim photographed the ceremony with the same artistic eye he brought to his gallery work. The reception was held at Canvas and Light, surrounded by the art that had brought us together and the community that had nurtured our growth. Instead of formal toasts, we invited guests to share stories about transformation, about times when what seemed like endings had actually been beginnings in disguise. As I danced with my new wife in the gallery where my artistic career had truly begun, I thought about the long journey that had led to this moment. The devastating honeymoon that had shattered my understanding of love and marriage, the months of healing in the mountains that had taught me to rely on myself, the leap of faith to Austin that had connected me with my artistic calling, and the love of my life. Every painful step had been necessary for the joy I felt now. Emma's betrayal hadn't just ended my first marriage, it had freed me to discover who I really was and what I was truly capable of creating. The man who'd been broken by her inability to love him fully had become someone who could build lasting happiness with a partner who saw and appreciated his authentic self. 10 years after that terrible night in Santorini, I finally understood that the best thing Emma had ever done for me was show me what I deserved by demonstrating what I was willing to accept. Her betrayal had been the catalyst for a transformation that led to everything meaningful in my current life. Worst thing that happens to you is also the best thing that happens to you. Sometimes getting exactly what you thought you wanted would have prevented you from discovering what you actually needed. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart is doing you the greatest favor of your life, even if it takes years to understand the gift they've given you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.